There is a dangerous part of the lifetime of any car project where it's not done, but it's kind of done. It's done enough to be mostly what it is. It is an off-road Viper. It's got all the suspension and that sweet front bumper, but it is still unfinished. And I will admit I do kind of like the unfinished look. I like things rough around the edges. I am not a classy person, so much so that even my die-cast models are on cinder blocks. But no rear bumper is a little too unfinished, so today we're going to weld up another metal bumper, similar to the front, but this time for the rear. And we're going to add a hitch to it, because what's the use of having 500 pound-feet of torque if you can't tow? It's been a few months since I've talked about ground news, and kind of a lot's happened since then. And still, maybe more than ever, the political divide has made it hard to find out what's really happening in the news. Fortunately, there is a filter to the chaos. Ground News analyzes almost 50,000 news sources every day and distills it down in a way that makes it much easier to get the actual story. A few days ago, Meta decided to end its fact-checking program, and the stories could not be more different. The story has 841 sources with a pretty balanced split of 32% coming from the left and 34% from the right. Half of the stories are from media conglomerates, with only 10% coming from independent news sources. At a quick glance, you can see that the right-leaning sources focus on censorship and free speech, while the left-leaning sources focus on the alignment with the upcoming administration. It is my opinion that one of the most detrimental aspects of modern discourse is that we all tend to get our data from sources that post things we already agree with, our own little bubble of data. One of the best ways to look outside of that bubble is with Blind Spot. This feature will help you break out of your echo chamber by showing you stories disproportionately reported by one side. I don't usually enjoy reading the news because so much of it is noise and bias. Ground News is, I think, the best tool for cutting through that bias. Go to ground.news/superfastmatt to subscribe through my link for 40% off unlimited access with their Vantage plan, the same plan I use. By subscribing, you are directly supporting an independent platform on a mission to restore facts, transparency, and trust in the news. The first step of this process is to 3D scan the back of the car. I have a full model of the car that I found online, but it doesn't have important things like bolt holes and studs, so a quick and dirty scan and we have all of that data. It's always a pain to work with 3D scan data because it's noisy and takes a lot of computing power, so I just draw all the important stuff in basic CAD shapes and hide the scan. One of my most requested videos is how to use CAD, and I haven't done this video yet for a few reasons, not the least of which is that I have really bad habits in CAD. I don't label anything, I don't constrain my sketches, and I build designs on piles of references to previous unused designs. If someone worked for me and gave me CAD that looks like mine, I would have them shot. I bring this up because I know a lot of people are going to ask for a walkthrough of how I did this design, and here's how I did it. Brute force. I just sort of sketch out what I want it to look like from the side, then I extrude that, then I do the same for the rear, modifying the previous extrusion, and then I just kind of add planes and sketches, cutting things out until it looks kind of okay, then I decide that I hate it and start all over again. This process continues 3 or 4 times until I decide I don't love it, but I don't hate it, and I just kind of want to move on to the next step. This bumper really only needs to do 2 things. It needs to have a hitch bolted onto it, and it needs to cover up this part of the body and frame. I want it to be minimal. I like the look of the high departure angle rear end, but it will be a challenge to design something minimal with a high-mounted trailer hitch that doesn't look like a cat's butthole. I'm going with aluminum for most of this so I can keep the weight down. This car has 2-wheel drive, so it's never going to be a serious rock crawler, so hopefully the bumpers don't see too much abuse. And if they do, I can fix it with a welder. Part of it will be steel. In fact, everything between the car frame and the hitch receiver will be an 1/8-inch steel tube. It's not the heaviest steel tube, but it's over twice as thick as the car frame, so I think we'll be okay. The toe points will be the same as the front, 1/2-inch thick aluminum. Some people have commented that these might fail in an aggressive kinetic recovery strap situation, but those people fail to recognize that the frame of the car might fail in an aggressive kinetic recovery strap situation. These toe mounts are good for about 15,000 pounds before failure. The frame probably about 25,000 depending on how it's loaded and what the exact alloy is. In any case, if the car needs to be towed out of anything serious, we'll probably just use the axle. I decided to add lights to the rear bumper just like the front bumper, even though they will probably be used like 3 times in the car's existence. I'm also going to add some removable panels in the rear, similar to the front. These are mostly just to break up the bumper visually, so it's not just a wall of flat panels. It also has the added bonus of allowing me to change the pattern in the future if I want to. I'm actually going to add 4 removable panels, the upper ones and 2 more down low on either side of the hitch. These lower ones are really just here because I can't decide if I like it better with this area filled out or cut away like this. So with these removable, I could just choose whenever it's all together. Most of this bumper will be shaded by the trunk and the frame, but part of it sticks down just enough that it might catch some air. So these cutout panels will need to be able to vent out some air. Some people will use slots to vent the air, while others prefer circles. I, however, went with a combination of slots and circles, getting the best of both worlds. There are a handful of places to attach this thing to the car. The obvious four are these studs coming out of the rear fenders. This is where the old rear fascia attached. I had to double check the thread pitch. The metric nuts wouldn't go on cleanly, and this car is a total random hodgepodge of inch and metric fasteners. Dodge just grabbed whatever was in the parts bin, irrespective of what decade it came from. They are metric. I just had to clean up the threads. I can also attach it to the old bumper mounts. This is where the old fiberglass bumper used to be bolted. This is also the only place I can really pass any load through. Those toe mounts that I want to put on there need a pretty direct load path to the frame. Otherwise, using them would just result in a rapid bumper removal. On the front, I made a steel structure that bolted into the frame in 4 places, and then I bolted the toe points to that structure. The rest of the bumper is welded to those toe points, and that's how it's held onto the car. The rear will be done in a similar way, except that the lower frame points don't exist on the rear. They did, but I cut them off so I could get that solid rear axle in. So the steel structure will just be a simple beam across the car. This is also where the trailer hitch receiver will go. So with heavy wall steel, this whole structure should be totally capable of towing tens of thousands of tons, give or take. There is a problem, however. The frame that the bumper attaches to is less substantial. The plates are about 60 thousandths of an inch thick, or about 1.5 millimeters, and the frame is about the same, which means if I tow a fat trailer up a steep hill with this car, the frame could go full Cybertruck on me. Once again, the stuff I designed is adequate for truck use, but the stuff Dodge designed is not. It's like they didn't even consider that someone would be doing this kind of thing with a Viper. In any case, I designed some reinforcement. I'm going to weld a plate on the frame here like this, with another plate welded at a right angle. I'll put some gussets in there to connect them, and then I'll run 3 bolts through the bumper, the original frame plate, some spacers, and then my reinforcement. The spacers are just there to clear the welds that are already there on the frame. This won't beef up the frame tubes at all. In fact, the welding heat-affected zone will probably make it a bit weaker, but it does beef up the plates that this all bolts to, which is my main concern. I went with a bolt-on receiver, mostly because it has the safety chain hooks and these lateral supports already in there, but I will probably just weld it on anyway. We'll figure that out later. Once I had the design done, I sent all the files to SendCutSend for laser cutting. I had them bend a few of the parts. You can just export an STL file of the part with the bend in it, and their software will figure out the cuts and bends so that you can get back exactly what you want. The only thing you have to do is add a straight edge that's parallel with the bend. This is so they can locate it in the CNC bender. You just chop this part off with a saw when your parts arrive. The bumper is symmetric, so half of the parts get bent with an up bend and half of them with a down bend. The top piece was too big, so I made it in 2 and then just welded the middle together. The nice thing about having bends already in the parts is that it makes it kind of self-fixturing. You don't need to make anything to hold the parts in the right places because the parts kind of do that for you. I'd be a little more careful on something where the tolerances mattered, but this could be off a 1/4 inch in some places and you wouldn't be able to tell just by looking at it. The main steel bumper was just a couple of laser cut plates and then some 2x3 steel tube, and this is where I had screw up number 1. These tubes are at 45 degrees, so I cut this one at 45 degrees, and I cut this one at 45 degrees, and then I put them together, and I had... Anyone? 90 degrees. This is such a rookie mistake. I did not measure twice and cut once. I measured once and cut 4 times. To fix this, I kept the same middle tube and I just cut new end pieces with a 90-degree cut on one side and welded it all together with some little filler pieces I chopped off the old parts. Screw up number 2 actually happened a couple of weeks ago, but I didn't notice it until now. Remember how I had those removable panels designed in? Well, I forgot to add the cutout to the files I sent in to SendCutSend, so they arrived with no cutouts. I thought about reordering new ones, but I decided to just weld it together and fix it with a jigsaw later. After several hours of welding, I decided it was time for a test fit. It mostly fit. The bumper definitely expanded out a bit after welding, but not so much that I couldn't get it in place. This was also a good time to weld in those steel plates that bolt to the aluminum toe plates. The steel structure has these 2 parts welded on, and the aluminum toe mounts extend through the bumper and bolt to those plates. So I bolted them to the aluminum, installed the aluminum in place, and then tack welded the steel together. And this is when I found screw up number 3. Those removable panels that I had added in served another purpose, and that was to allow access to the fasteners, both the ones that attach the aluminum to the steel and the ones that attach the steel to the frame of the car. So without those access holes, you can't remove anything. Fortunately, I did not use lock nuts for this initial setup, and I was able to get it apart with a screwdriver and just a bit of profanity. After I got it apart, I did some final welding before putting it all back together for one last test fit before paint. And then I decided to drive it 100 miles. I drove up to Highway 2 and out to Newcomb's Ranch. This is a nice Friday morning car meetup. I don't usually go because it's real far from my house and I have to drive right through downtown Los Angeles to get there. But the twisty mountain roads are great. The car was awesome, still super fun in the canyons. I didn't push it, partly because it's on off-road tires, but mostly because this is a real dumb place to find the limits of your car. It definitely needs anti-roll bars still. It does have noticeable body roll, and the front brakes are still OEM Dodge Viper brakes, which means they are literal garbage. I've mentioned this before, but the rear brakes that came with the Jeep axle are bigger than the front brakes that came with the Viper, both in pad area and piston area. I really need to change these. I arrived to a crowd of cars and people and was immediately swarmed by about 40 people. I hate to toot my own horn, but this might be the coolest car here. It certainly had the biggest crowd. I answered questions and chatted with people for a couple of hours and then headed back down the mountain. On the way, I saw a group of people standing next to the road looking down a cliff, and I thought, uh-oh, I know what that means. Someone exceeded the limit of their tires in the worst possible place, oversteered the car through the oncoming lane, over a dirt embankment, and down about 150 feet of very steep mountain. He was still in the car having the worst day of his life, but somehow not the last day of his life. He not only survived, but walked away without any major injuries. Well, he didn't walk away, he was airlifted away, hopefully at least somewhat aware of how incredibly lucky he is. This happens all the time up here, and a lot of the time it's much worse. This is one of the worst places to test the limits of your car. He was down there for almost an hour before the ambulance arrived, and even longer before they could get him out. Don't be this guy. With the bumper thoroughly road tested, it was time to cut out the openings for the removable panels. I traced them onto the bumper and jigsaw cut them out, filing the edges to make it nice. Then I screwed the panels to the rear perimeter piece, clamped it all together, and welded it in. I painted it with Steelit. I really like this paint. I've said some nice things about it a few times, and the only thing I don't like about it is that they've yet to send me a bunch of cans of free paint, which seems like a pretty big oversight on their part. I installed the bumper and put the lights in. With the removable panels actually removable, I can easily get to the fasteners to take off the bumper, both the aluminum part and the whole thing with the steel beam. I added in the closeout panels to finish it off, and I'm pretty happy with this. After driving it around for a while, I did switch to slots instead of slots and holes, except for one on the right, for just a little bit of extra airflow. I welded up a spare tire carrier for this thing that goes in the trailer hitch receiver. I used a hitch that locks itself in place so it won't wobble around a bunch. There's not really a good place for a spare tire on this car. You can't fit it in the trunk or under the trunk. I still might make a roof rack cage and put it on the top, or even cut out part of the trunk and put two in there vertically. But for the time being, this is the solution. And I kind of hate it. Looks real dumb. So I took it off and we'll figure out something else later. So now that the Viper has a tow hitch, how much can it tow? Well, according to Dodge, 0. But Dodge also thinks people want fake engine noises on their electric muscle cars. So maybe Dodge doesn't know very much. The actual number is probably not a lot. We have plenty of torque, but the brakes are still bad. I can and probably will fix that, but the car only weighs 3,400 pounds and the thin wall frame is still an issue. Plus, we have the added issue of the location of the receiver. It's about a foot higher than it needs to be, so I'll have to get one of those dorky trailer hitches you see on lifted trucks. Then, if I have to slam on the brakes, there will be a huge bending load into that flimsy frame, and huge bending loads are bad. There is an SAE standard for determining towing capacity, but I don't know how to read, so I'll just make an educated guess and say 1,954 pounds, which is exactly how much my loaded land speed car trailer weighs. How about that? What are the odds? Used to be that you had to impress people to get people to watch your show, but now all you have to do is impress the algorithm. So do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. It actually helps the channel a lot. And of course, all hail the algorithm.